Let's speak to Ali Abu Nima. He is the co-founder of the Electronic Intifada and joins me on Skype via Skype from Chicago. Ali, thank you very much indeed for being with us. So, in the past, there has been concern about the control of al-Aqsa, which led to fighting, many times. But these metal detectors at the al-Aqsa Mosque right now just seems to be another symbol of intrusion of the Israeli occupation. But, I mean, is this really the core issue here in terms of this conflict more broadly?
No, it isn't. It's the spark. Look, after 50 years of occupation, of Israeli colonialism in East Jerusalem, settlements, record house demolitions last year, Palestinians see Israel inevitably encroaching and wanting to take over the al-Aqsa Mosque compound, and the metal detectors are another sign of that. So far, what's been missing from the conversation is the fact that over the last 2 years, there has been a big increase in provocations by Israeli extremist groups funded by the Israeli government, whose openly declared goal is to take over the al-Aqsa Mosque compound and to take down the existing holy sites, the al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, and replace them with a Jewish temple. Last week, after the 2 Israeli police officers were killed enforcing the occupation in Jerusalem, the head of this so-called temple movement, the organization that heads this so-called temple movement, said Israel needed to take the opportunity to impose its control. Quote, "We must liberate the Temple Mount from murderous Islam and return it to the people of Israel." From the top organization that pushes this agenda, the so-called Temple Institute, is funded by the government of Israel.
On the other side, the Israelis have also been presenting this as a case as Israel being a guarantor of safety and security at the compound, rather than being seen as an occupier. What do you say to that?
Well, that's exactly what Yoav Mordechai, the Israeli general who has a great deal of blood on his hands from the attacks on Gaza that he commanded, and who is the chief military officer, who is the real ruler of the West Bank, not Mahmoud Abbas. You just had an interview with the real Palestinian president, who is Israeli General Yoav Mordechai. He rules the West Bank, and this military dictator of the West Bank is the cause of violence. Israeli occupation is the cause of violence. And Netanyahu, by the way, I mean, the metal detectors, the Israeli army itself, even the occupation army and Israel's secret police, the Shin Bet, advised Netanyahu not to keep the metal detectors there because they understood that they're useless, that they're not really there for security. What they are is to advance Israel's political claim and its hold over Jerusalem as another step to taking over the compound. That's what Palestinians fear, and that's why we have seen the population of Jerusalem, the people of Jerusalem that have lived under this brutal military occupation, coming out into the streets in their thousands to defend al-Aqsa, and they have been brutally attacked. I mean, how could Israel be a guarantor of security when it's Israeli forces that are going out and attacking peaceful demonstrators, that just in the past 48 hours killed 4 Palestinian youths, Mohammed Sharaf, Mohammed Ghanem, Mohammed Khalaf, and Yusuf Kashur today, who are simply people in an occupied territory demonstrating for their right to be free of this occupation. And how could, in those circumstances, how could anyone call the occupier a guarantor of security and stability?
All right,
but we also have to point out the sheer hypocrisy of the so-called international community, which did not rush to the UN Security Council when it was only Palestinians being killed by the occupation. But now that there was an attack that killed 3 Israeli settlers, all of a sudden this is an international crisis and the Security Council is meeting. That's why the occupation has continued for so many decades, because no one will hold Israel accountable and end it.
Now, going on to the domestic issue very quickly, I know we talked about Mahmoud Abbas, but clearly the Palestinians have been very frustrated with the Palestinian leadership to this day. Where do you see this going in terms of him now severing ties with the Israeli authorities? Could this possibly result in a more longer-term damage between the two sides?
No, people should not be so gullible as to think Mahmoud Abbas is going to sever ties with the occupation, because it's the Israeli occupation that keeps the Palestinian Authority in place. Mahmoud Abbas has said previously publicly that the so-called security coordination with the military occupation is sacred, his word, not mine, and that will continue. His statement is purely for public consumption to try to look like he's doing something, but he will not, absolutely not, end his close cooperation with the military occupation that has destroyed the lives of millions of Palestinians now in the West Bank and Gaza Strip for 50 years. I'll tell you this, if the so-called international community was so concerned and they wanted to end the occupation, they could end it. But it continues because the European Union, the UN, the United States, and a whole lot of Arab regimes are content to see it continue. I mean, just imagine if all those Gulf states besieging or placing sanctions against Qatar would instead place them against Israel. But we all know they wouldn't dare.
All right, Ali Abunimah, live for us on Skype from Chicago. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.